I would now go from the operational challenges more to the technical challenges I can see. And the first of all is when you talk about HD and higher data rates, the most important thing is to find a suitable HD format for archiving your assets. When I look at my projects, very often, and you talk to the customer and you hear, yeah, format decision is quite clear. We have this production systems, we need that format, everything's fine. But if you start with the project work and you look closer which systems are involved and where the material needs to be transferred to, then you see that the decision of archiving format is not that easy as it looked in the beginning, because many things need to be considered. In generally, if you have a good source material, then normally you have a good quality at the end of your process. I think it's very important to do as many end-to-end tests as you can possibly do to find out what is your right format for archiving your HD content. The EBU has a recommendation which is quite interesting. They say it should be a 4:2 format, at least 8-bit. If you do graphics or high-end animation, it should be 10-bit. If you talk about iframe formats, it should not be less than 100 megabits, and for long-op, it should be not less than 50 megabits. Very important also to consider is that you have an open standard in terms of codec and wrapper, so that you're not bound to one company in the market. And the complexity of the codec shouldn't be too high, so that at least a software-based solution in real time is possible. Very important and interesting for future projects may be the scalability of a file format, which could be quite helpful in terms of repurposing content. So scalability in terms of data rate and picture size. So the interoperability is very important also for B2B transfers. This refers mainly to open standards and open codecs. We heard from Granby that establishing workflows for automatically repurposing HD content is key. So we heard that you maybe cannot use the same shooting for for small screens. So you need to have some kind of post-production. You want to automate that as far as possible. That's something which needs to be considered. And not to forget is upgrading the IT infrastructure for dealing with the higher data rates. Very often 50 megabit formats are used in order to comply with the existing 50 megabit SD world. But maybe 50 megabit formats in the archive are not sufficient for your processes. So you have to consider what's to do. So the storage requirements, the network bandwidth, and of course rendering is a very big issue in HD formats. So as we can see, the rendering time for conversion is significantly increasing. My experience is that it's very hard to get a real-time transcoding with HD. Most of the time you're slower than that. It depends on the IT processing power you put behind that. A very interesting topic is also wide area transfer for HD, high resolution files, if that's something which is your requirement. So you have to be very careful, consider what you need to do and where to deliver your material, because a normal FTP transfer connection could be not sufficient to do that. Another challenge when we talk about HD is Dolby 5.1, or better to say multi-channel audio. Here is the same situation. First you have to find out how do you archive your HD content with the high quality audio. Do you want to use Dolby E? Do you want to use discrete tracks? So both variations have pros and cons. For Dolby E, it's quite clear. It is one container. You can put up 8 programs in the container. You can put metadata to each program in that container. It is a bit transparent if you have all the right equipment in the process change, so hard cuts are possible and you don't destroy the Dolby E. And you have a fixed processing delay, which you can adjust your complete infrastructure to. But Dolby E has also some negative sides, which is, first of all, it is a proprietary format. So you really have to consider if you want to store your material in a proprietary format in your archive. That's something which is important. You have always to consider the delay in the process chain. Even if you know that it's a fixed delay, you have to consider that. And the bit transparency is can have some negative sides. If you lose some bits in the stream, you can lose complete frames. If we talk about discrete tracks, you have all the flexibility you need in terms of editing and quality and so on. But what you have to consider is you need a container for metadata, because at the end, when you go to an outlet, you have to convert it in some Dolby format, and you need metadata for the Dolby encoders and decoders. That's something which needs to be considered when you talk about Dolby and 5.1. Another important point regarding Dolby is to find the most practical values for delivering your content. Dolby E offers about 29 parameters for adjusting your content. So one thing is the downmixing for stereo can be done with these parameters. You can adjust the dialogue level, dynamic range, and so on and so on. Some of these parameters are just for the professional format for Dolby E, some of them also for Dolby Digital and for the customer. So you have to find out what the most practical values are. I find it very often that only end-to-end tests help to do that. And if you have found these parameters, you have to maintain the correct delivery to the customer. This is also something which is related to end-to-end tests. Last but not least, if you have Dolby E in your environment, you don't want to have encoding and decoding cycles. So you want to use Dolby E within the tapeless workflow. You need some tools to do that, to create Dolby files from discrete tracks and vice versa, and decode and encode. There are plugins on the market. You can do that, mainly for Pro Tools. There's also a system from Dolby who can do that. But we will hear later in the presentation that these kind of workflows are not that trivial as they seem in the beginning.